Today I'm taking Narrowboat Perseverance through the longest canal tunnel in the UK, and we're going to be deep underground for over 3 miles. For safety reasons, I have to have a volunteer chaperone on board the boat for the trip, and I'm also issued with a safety helmet and a high-vis jacket. The tunnel is really narrow. In places it's barely 7 foot wide, so before you set off, your boat gets measured to make sure it'll fit. This is actually the first time I've ever driven the boat through a tunnel. In fact, I've rarely been a passenger on the boat in a tunnel. Today we're having a bit of a role reversal. I'm driving, and as George is much happier in the outside than in a cold work tunnel, Michael will be walking him over the top. I wonder what George is thinking as he watches his mum and his home disappear into the big black hole. For much of its length, the tunnel's barely wider than the boat, and it's by no means straight, so it's going to take a fair bit of concentration to drive the boat through. The first section of the tunnel is lined with the original bricks, but the surface of the tunnel will change often as we travel through the different strata. In places, the original brick lining is supported by thick brick arches. There's also stretches that are lined with newer engineering bricks. About half the tunnel is actually open to bare rock face, and other parts are lined with sprayed concrete. For context, the Standedge Tunnel is on the summit level of the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. The canal crosses the Pennines between the towns of Huddersfield in West Yorkshire and Ashton-under-Lyne in Greater Manchester. Without the tunnel, up to 120 additional locks would have been needed for the canal to pass over the hill. So while digging a 3-mile tunnel wasn't an easy prospect, it was definitely the preferable solution. As well as being the longest canal tunnel in Britain, it's also the deepest and highest. It's 336 feet below the surface and also 643 feet above sea level. Work on the tunnel began in 1794, shortly after the building of the canal was authorised. It was dug from both ends, and shafts were also made from the surface, meaning it could be dug from the middle as well. Unfortunately, some course corrections had to be made in order for all of the sections to meet up, which means the tunnel is not very straight. The Standedge Tunnel finally opened in 1811. Initially, about 40 boats would use the tunnel every day, but passage was slow. There's no towpath in the tunnel, so horses had to be walked over the top, and boats were led through. Traffic inside the tunnel is only one way, so this would create a queue at either end of the tunnel for boats waiting to go down the locks. There's actually 4 tunnels running parallel through the Pennines between Marsden and Diggle, this canal tunnel and 3 railway tunnels, although 2 of those are no longer in use. It's a familiar story, but the railway proved to be too much competition, and slowly use of the canal declined. The canal was officially closed in 1944, and in 1950 the canal's lock gates were removed. In the 60s and 70s, talk of reopening the Huddersfield Narrow Canal began, but the project became known as the Impossible Restoration. It was possible, however, and on the 1st of May 2001, over 50 years since the last boat made the passage, the tunnel was opened up again. We're very close to Diggle now, and the end of the tunnel. It took us 1 hour and 38 minutes to make the passage today, and I'm quite impressed with myself for how few times I hit the side. It did take an awful lot of concentration though, and I'm utterly exhausted. Not to mention cold and damp. Thanks so much to all the volunteers that support the Standedge Tunnel and make it possible for boaters like us to make this journey.